From the Mayborn School of Journalism at the University of North Texas, this is NT Daily News.
Good afternoon. I'm Amos Neighbors with NT Daily News. Campuses across the United States have become intense backgrounds for pro-Palestine protests, with New York's Hunter College being the latest to stage a walkout and encampment until the university divests from their assets in Israel. Like many of the protests seen on campuses, police and in some cases National Guard have been called in to disperse the protests, citing that the students involved conducting these protests are doing so unlawfully. These protests come after months of intense violence in Israel and Gaza, where nearly 40,000 people have been killed so far and more expected to be found in the coming months. Protesters took to the streets of Israel on Monday night to demand a deal for the release of the hostages held in Gaza by Hamas. In Tel Aviv, demonstrators marched down the Ayalon highway, calling for an agreement to the evening. Hamas said it had accepted a ceasefire proposal. Police made several arrests as they tried to keep protesters from blocking the roads, but no major clashes were reported. Another group of protesters also gathered outside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem Monday night. Protesters could be heard chanting, "Nothing is more important, every hostage must return," and "We won't give up until they all come back." A member of Hamas political bureau tells CNN sources that Hamas is waiting for an Israeli response after the group agreed to a ceasefire and a hostage deal proposed by Egypt and Qatar. Mediators have reportedly convinced Hamas to accept the deal after a meeting between the Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed Al-Thani and US CIA Director William Burns. Reportedly, the Israeli government is reviewing the Hamas announcement. It's unclear whether Hamas has agreed to the framework that became public last week, which called for the release of 20 to 30 Israeli hostages over several weeks in exchange for a temporary ceasefire and the release of Palestinian prisoners. Civilians in Gaza are reportedly being told to move from the safe zone in Rafah to Khan Yunis in the west after Israel announced on Monday that they would be invading Rafah. Representatives of the Israeli government have said that the incursion into Gaza is being done with a limited scope. However, nearly 100,000 Gazan civilians have been told to leave the city of Rafah via leaflet, so that Israel can use more widespread military assault on the southern Gazan city. This comes mere hours after the political bureau of Hamas accepted the terms of a temporary ceasefire in exchange for the safe release for the hostages still held in Gaza.
Our best estimate is this will impact 100,000 people. There's at least 1 million, perhaps 1.4 million people in Rafah, almost half of whom are children. And any kind of operation here would have catastrophic circumstances for them. And our concern is, as these 100,000 people, if they choose to evacuate to the west, that it would create panic with the rest of the population, and you'd see mass movement of people to areas that are just not prepared to receive them.
For not entire southern Gaza, the entire Rafah area, but for a significant portion of it, 100,000 people. And of course, we have concerns that any evacuation at all in such a crowded area, if you see 100,000 people move, you're going to see other people in the next area move as well, which of course is something that you want to see happen if there's a military operation. But the problem now is there's such limited places for them to go.
With the invasion of Rafah seemingly imminent and hopes for a ceasefire exploding across Gaza, the 1.3 million people seeking refuge in the South Gazan city are on the brink of more catastrophe. CNN's Paula Hancock has the story.
A grandmother kisses her young grandchildren. Their small bodies share just one body bag. 4-year-old Kareem and his 2-year-old sister Mona were killed on Tuesday by an Israeli airstrike. Their aunt says they are innocent. The babies went to bed last night and never woke up. Our hearts are broken forever. The doctors tried to save Mona, but could not. The children's parents were seriously injured in the same strike. But Rafah was not home for these children. Their grandmother says the family were displaced multiple times by the Israeli military, ending up in a tent on the southern border alongside hundreds of thousands of others who have nowhere else to go. Speaking of the Israeli military, she says, "This is all they want. This is their goal." The IDF referred to a previous statement when asked about this strike, saying they are operating to dismantle Hamas, adding, quote, "Remaining in an active combat zone has inherent risks." But despite months of threatening a major ground offensive in Rafah, The military has not told civilians to evacuate. For many here, there is no other option. At the start of this week in Rafah, 22 people were killed in an Israeli airstrike, including at least one infant and a toddler. A 1-year-old killed is carried in their uncle's arms. He says this is who they are targeting. This is the safe Rafah they talk about. It is the area the Israeli military has pushed civilians towards for months, an area well over 1 million Palestinians are barely surviving in. Food, water, shelter are scarce, disease is rising. But amid such misery, some adults are trying to remind children of their previous life, just 7 months ago, when they could play and learn safely. This volunteer teacher says the children's mental state is distressed. They have no stability, they're distracted and they lose focus, so we work twice as hard to try and grab their attention and help them learn. Mohammed says he's happy he can play and study here. He says, we lost our schools. We lost everything. A tent school may not seem much, but even this pretense of normality for these children will be lost if they're forced to move yet again. Paula Hancock's CNN, Abu Dhabi.
The Israeli government announced that more than 100,000 civilians in Rafah are to be moved west to Khan Yunis on Monday, stoking fears in the Palestinian population that a massive expulsion is occurring. Thanks for watching NT Daily News. We will be back next semester.